Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show, Unpacking Organizations, where Rupert and I talk about our passion topics around org design and workforce planning. Rupert, hello, how are you today? And
As
how's
always,
weather
the weather,
in London? Because it must be sunny now, finally.
sun shining, and
I
it only
love
rains
it.
60% of the time in London. People don't. You get a lot more rainfall in Paris than you do in London, and double the rainfall in Auckland versus London. By the way, so London doesn't rain that much; it's just grey a lot. But right now, the sun's shining, and we're all happy.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
And especially happy because we have a great guest, Cole Naper, who is got quite a few strings to his cap. So VP at Lightcast, which is a really exciting analytics firm, and he runs the research there. But on top of that, a book is coming out called People Analytics. That's the short title. I think it's coming out in August, and runs an extremely popular podcast. So as a pro at this podcasting business, called Directionally Correct, which is actually it's a great podcast. So I'd really recommend people to look out for the book. And Cole, well done on getting a book done. I know personally how hard that is and how much hard work. So congrats with that and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, guys.
Welcome
So
to the show, Cole, and congrats for the book and a successful podcast.
Yeah, everything's relative. So it's successful compared to what, right?
compared to what it was 6 months ago, because it's growing.
Yeah, exactly.
So there we go. So Cole, just before we dive in, it'd be great to know a little bit more about you, and probably also a little bit, not all our listeners might know Lightcast, so it might be good to just position that as well, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'll give you like the really short version of my career. So I've actually spent most of my career being a practitioner in large organizations. So the Toyotas, PepsiCos, FedEx, Granger, a few others as well, and then also at a few startups. But I started with Lightcast back in December as a VP of research. And for those of who aren't familiar with Lightcast, so the history of the company is it was MZ and Burning Glass, if anybody is familiar with those names, merged in 2022 to create Lightcast. And we are the world's leading, labor market intelligence and analytics firm. And so it's really exciting to be here. I get to do really, really cool research. And one of the things that excites me the most, having been on the practitioner side of the house, is I actually get to help influence our products in some way too, which is exciting because I know the things that I used to want to have that I never had that we can actually build, and that's really fun to be able to contribute to that.
And Cole, when you were a practitioner, what kind of work were you doing?
Sure. So I've really focused primarily my career in four different areas. So my background is in IO psychology. So I started out in kind of more of the selection and assessment space. Quickly though, I moved into workforce planning, and I say I've never really left, even though my job titles changed, just because I've always integrated workforce planning into everything that I've done. But workforce planning became workforce analytics, which became people analytics, and then I kind of adopted the moniker also of talent intelligence throughout that lifetime. So those are really the four areas that I've engaged in, and really love the space. And I think I've really seen it from all angles. So my team at FedEx had over 50 people on it, all the way down to a really small people analytics startup that was a lot of fun as well.
Amazing. And for the OD listeners, they might say, well, why are we doing all this data and on labor markets around the world? But people
Yeah,
that
why
are
are
really
you?
into it, why are we? So the big reason when you get there's a big thing when you're designing an organization, it's about everything being holistic and thinking about all the different angles. And one of the angles is location. So I can design an organization and I can have a lot of positions being established in location X, and you want to grow there. But if you don't know what the true cost is going to be, but beyond cost, how large is the talent pool for the different roles that you're looking to recruit and what have you, you can really make some very, very expensive decisions. And location strategy is one of the lenses that you have when you're designing your organization. particularly as you're growing geographically. And it's not just thinking about countries. There's also, I've expanded businesses into the US, and where in the US should we set up our headquarters, for instance, as it was a material question. And you live with those decisions for a very long time. Slash, they're very hard to undo once you've made them. So be helpful to understand from your perspective, like what kind of data are we talking about when we're looking at location strategy?
Absolutely. And so it's funny, I know in prepping for this, Rupert, that was one of the questions I actually asked you guys.
It
I was like,
was.
why did you locate in this city in the United States versus
Yeah.
this other city? And that it led to a really fruitful discussion. So I remember that as a part of our preparation. But I always think kind of go back to our basics. And so when I look at workforce planning, I think about it as the combination of internal supply and internal demand coupled with external supply and external demand. And most of the time, workforce planning organizations overload on the internal data and kind of negate the external data. And so, location strategy is just kind of one of those pillars of your external supply that's available for you and where you might tend to locate, where you might not tend to locate. And so, Lightcast has really great data, not only in the United States, but all over the world. I think we have data from over 150 countries. It's really exciting. But one of the things that I particularly have been doing research on with some of our other researchers at Lightcast is the relationship between locations and talent shortages, and knowing what's coming with demographic changes over the next few years. And so, just to kind of tee it up, every I think most people nowadays have heard the term like the silver tsunami, which is baby boomers retiring, exiting the workforce. And what that's doing, though, that don't think a lot of people think about from a supply and demand perspective is, and it's different for every different geography, and it's different based on the company that you're in. So we did some really great research last year called the Rising Storm, which looked at this very much from a geography lens. And then recently this year looked at it from a company lens. We called it the Workforce Risk Index, where we literally scored every Fortune 1000 company. And it's out there available. I'm sure you guys can share it in the show notes. We scored them all on four characteristics: their market risk, i.e., which would be the locations. We scored them on their occupational risk, their industry risk, and the AI skills gap risk that they had over the next 5 years. And so it was a really exciting time to be able to look at this type of data. And again, it's all out there for free. Organizations can go look at it. And if your organization, isn't in the top Fortune 1000, you can just request your score and we'll send it to you for free again as well. And so, really interesting stuff, because what we don't understand is there's really two economies that are going on right now. We have college degrees and non college degree workers. And what you're seeing is historically, there was a shortage of college degree workers, and therefore that commanded a high wage, and there was a shortage. That was where you got some of the most technical skills, was through going to a college degree. And then it was, sometimes it was seen in a negative light to not have a college degree, and there was an excess of those employees. What we're seeing with baby boomers retiring and them being a generation that had fewer college degrees, they're not being replaced with other baby boomers. They're being replaced with Gen Zers, which have between a 60 and a 70% chance of having a college degree. And so for the first time in history, we're seeing, and the Gen Zers are a much smaller generation as well. And so what you're seeing is the supply and demand for college degrees is actually changing in front of our eyes. And so for the first time in our lifetime, college degree holders are actually being pressured from a wage standpoint, because there's an excess of supply and there's a dearth of demand. Whereas for non-college degree holders that are in the skilled disciplines, blue collar disciplines, service industry, there is a dearth of supply and an excess of demand, and their wages are shooting upward. And so we have not reached kind of a market equilibrium in that space. And so it's a really fascinating time to be a researcher and looking at these dynamics, but also being able to talk to employers who are going through this transition from a workforce planning perspective, and being able to help and guide them through that process.
That's really fascinating, Cole. I mean, I'm soaking it all in. And I think what also excites me about this research is that the kind of geopolitical environment that we live in these days, and I don't want to go deep into that, but everything is becoming more insular. There are more regulations all around. So definitely that plays a part in the location strategy as well. But what also piqued my interest as you were talking about is that you spoke about the AI skill gaps. And that is so difficult to capture because
Yes.
it is still an emerging skill and it's changing by the minute. Because what the skill was last 3 months or 6 months, we have already created a little bit of um, collective journey as a civilization. We've all become a way much better skilled at it. So how do you track that, and how does that change the labor market? If you could talk a little bit about that.
One thing, and Lightcast recently released this is we have something called the LOT, which is the Lightcast Occupational Taxonomy. And so this is our own proprietary taxonomy of how we classify, and we have our own skills taxonomy as well. So if you overlay the skills with the occupations, we can get to a really, really granular level to be able to tell what are the emerging trends. And you can't see this in publicly available data. And so I've actually got some research that's coming out next week that's still being baked at the moment, but it's talking about this question of we just released LOT7, which is our new version, and we incorporated a lot of these new generative AI skills. And what was exciting about it is you really got to see, because what you can do is you can map them historically and you can see exactly when these skills started to get introduced into the common lexicon. And so one of the things that we saw as a part of our speed of skill change research that came out recently is that since 2022 there has been a 15,000% increase in job descriptions requiring generative AI as a part of the need for the job. Now, what we're also seeing right now, and again, this is coming out soon, and so I don't really want to get ahead of my skis, but and we're also starting to see a fragmentation of not only the disciplines associated with generative AI, but also the skills associated with it. And you're seeing an explosion of demand in those areas as well. So it's very, very exciting. But if you really went down to its core level of the people who are building generative AI, so not people who are using generative AI, but people who are building generative AI, there's still less than 20,000 of them in the entire world. And I don't think people realize that this is such a scarce discipline at the moment, but it is increasing rapidly. But that's an incredibly small number of people that fit within this discipline.
So anybody who's considering a career change right now, that's the cue for them.
Yeah,
So
There's a slight irony, well, juxtaposition on all of this, because on the one hand, to be able to do code and AI and use that is going to tend more towards the college educated, and
correct.
then simultaneously, what you're saying is, and when anyone that needs a plumber or help, around the house will know it's very, very hard to hire people with the trade, as an example, that non-college that you're talking about. And so there are multiple lenses when you're thinking about supply. And your point, people over-index on the internal.
Hmm.
Um, and why do you think that is? Is that just because that's the data they've got and the
I
lens?
think
What?
it's really two reasons. It's because it's the data that's in front of your face, if they're even looking at data at all,
Sure.
right? And because it's frankly it's what you know,
Yeah.
right? You know your data. It's a lot more uncomfortable to go out into the environment, into the wilderness of data and try to figure things out. And so it's just easier if you're using the data that is familiar to you. But I think that's why it's great, to have companies like Lightcast, companies like Orgvue out there that can help contextualize this data and the kinds
Yeah.
of partnerships that exist in that
Yeah.
space as well.
So I should probably, for the listeners. So we in Orgvue, we bring the data in from Lightcast to
Yeah.
help you. So as you're designing and what have you, using that, and it's just, and also the skills data and the taxonomies, but
yeah.
and just understanding by role what's the demand for AI and how's that going to change over time. Which, when you put a temporal lens on that, it's fascinating. So that's a really nice relationship we have going. So
Yeah.
thank you
So
for
let
that.
me That's fantastic, Rupert. Thank you for that call out. Let me ask a question from a practitioner lens because both of
Sure.
you are like, big datas, big platforms. As we're thinking about it, um, this is the baseline that is absolutely needed for us to start because you're bringing in an outside in
Hmm.
perspective, you're bringing in that research, you're bringing in the data. How do you then go about influencing people and changing the mindset internally with the organizations that you work for. Because many a times people see the data and they don't believe it, first of all, or they just default to what they already know. So this is extremely logic driven um, conversation, but many a times that is the toughest conversation to surpass. So how do you do that with your clients, with the people that you work with?
I can give my perspective. I'd love to hear
Sure.
Rupert's as well and yours as well. Um, I love that you pointed out it's almost like it's a different part of the brain that you're flexing, right? There's the logical, and then there's kind of like the emotional slash influence slash reasoning or not reasoning part of the brain that you're really trying to turn on. One of the things, this is going to go in kind of an odd direction, but I think it'll track with you here in a second. I did a 360-degree feedback earlier in my career, and one of my customers wrote, and this was not meant to be a positive, but I took it as a positive. They said, Cole has a maniacal focus on adding business value, and meaning basically I'm a maniac. And so internally, and this is why the longer title of my book was People Analytics Using Data Driven HR and Generative AI to Add Business Value as a business asset, right? And it's because everything that we do has to be in service of improving the business. And so I can't tell you how many times in my career I was told by a business leader, not an HR leader, wow, you don't sound like you're from HR. And the reason why is because, first of all, I don't go in trying to influence someone, I go in trying to understand someone. And I can't influence someone if I don't first understand them. So the things that I want to know is what's most important to the business, what are our vision, what are our strategic priorities, and I want to know them, and I want to know the explicit and the implicit problems associated with those from the business leaders who are actually having to implement those strategies. Like I want to know what their biggest challenges are, the ones that they may not even share with their team. And I can't know that if I come in with a point of view that says I'm right and I know everything and you just need to I just need to influence you to do what I already want to tell you to do. I want to first understand the business leader. Once I have gained that trust and gained that understanding, which is a very different skill set than again the logic, analysis, database decisions that go into kind of people analytics and workforce planning, then I can it's much more easy to get them to trust the data that I have if they trust me first, right? And that they know that I have their best interests at heart. So I even have used this example a few times in the last few weeks. Is I've had business leaders that I've met with that I said, "What are your biggest problems?" And like they would tell me things in HR that I had nothing to do with, and then I would just go help them try to figure out those things in HR, just to say, like, I know this isn't my job, but I want to prove to you that I care about moving the needle for your organization, right? And then upon demonstrating that I care and that it matters to me, then it's so much easier to bring data in, whether it be internal data or external data, what have you, to influence how the workforce planning or the lens of your human capital is going to move the needle for that organization. But I'd be curious, Rupert, what's been your perspective, or what's been yours, Shradha?
Shradha, why don't you go?
Sure. I mean, I fully resonate with you, Cole, that what is the business value that you're trying to solve, right?
Mhm.
And so, as an HR professional, I think that's the best compliment that we can get is that you are here to solve the business, not to do HR processes. And usually, my go to is that what is the problem that we are trying to solve here, right? It is not about adding an additional location into the organization. It's about creating a business value, creating, de-risking sometimes the business, or expanding a business in a different geography. So that's a business strategy, and that is the problem that we are trying to solve rather than just adding new location and who should be that part of. So I think fully resonating, and my go-to usually is that the problem, what is the problem that we are trying to solve?
Absolutely.
And that helps them start to think differently. But it is challenged sometimes because many a times the leaders have a location, a you know, feeder college or things like that in mind, and they just want to go ahead with that. And so, how do we backtrack them, help them backtrack their thinking, and say that, okay, let's think about it in a more data-driven way, and that
Yeah,
is an influencing challenge.
I mean,
Rupert.
I think where we get stuck is the problem statement
Mm,
is different for different people. and so people don't align, and they don't align on priorities.
Well said.
And so I can speak to Adam, Bridget, and Charlie, and Adam, Bridget, and Charlie have got fundamentally different objectives, and then finding out actually what the real issue is for each of them is also, that takes time and trust, and you might not get there. Uh, and even if you do get there, there is a conflict often in what people are trying to achieve. And so I think that's the part of the rub, is if people aren't
Yeah.
clear about what the strategy is, and the people aren't clear, and in the world of org design, what the design criteria are and what's most important, what are you fundamentally trying to achieve, and prioritization. And where people get stuck is through committees, and designed by committees, where everyone's trying to satisfy everyone. It's like sort of the United Nations of running a business, and a committee is not always the best forum.
Yeah.
And so how do you get to reach a position where you can actually make some brave decisions so you can move forward? And some people are just going to be unhappy with that. And so there has to be a point in time where, what's the expression, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to make tough decisions, and someone has to make those tough decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that's my experience, where particularly large corporates get stuck, and why so many large corporates end up failing is they don't do that, because the politics that play out. And as a management consultant, you often spend more time trying to manage the politics between powerful stakeholders than actually trying to work out, okay, what is the strategy and how we're going to execute, and what's the org design around that, and then bringing in data like what you're talking about, Cole, which is, okay, we want to go location strategy. And I kid you not, I'll give you an example, and I'll try to protect where this comes from. But this was putting an IT hub somewhere in Europe, and one person was really pushing for Lisbon and trying to push that. But turns out that he'd bought a house in Lisbon and wanted to move 50% of his time to Lisbon.
It's funny how that works.
And was
Yeah.
and that was uncovered by questioning and looking at the data, and like Lisbon wasn't the best option. And so an untoward game was being played by one of the very senior stakeholders. And so I think it's, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. This stuff is not easy, because not everyone's aligned. And yes, if you're trying to solve for one person, you understand their problem, and it's only their problem you're trying to solve, then the answer you gave is spot on. But I mean, as
Yeah.
you both know, and Shredder, you're living this every day, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
And so finding a way to align on criteria. And so, Cole, you're going to go.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, like, I think about it, and I've never worked there, but I've heard a lot about it. Is That's why Amazon has the kind of cultural principle of disagreeing but commit,
Yeah,
right? So we're never going to get to 100% alignment, but we got to commit to move action, like the bias towards action that they always talk about as well. But you also kind of made me think about one of my favorite quotes is a horse designed by committee is a camel,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
one of my goals in life is to not
I've
create
never
any
heard
camels.
that. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And that, and so in the world of org design, people even have the committee members sign contracts physically. I've seen that. But if you're having to get people to sign something, you're really in trouble. Like, then
Yeah.
you're kind of dead. Like, so that, disagree and commit, but there's got to be looking around are you really committing? Like, and very quickly, I think you can uncover that people aren't.
Cool. I love that. Yeah. Sorry,
No, go
Rupert.
try to
Cool.
go.
I really like that idea of disagreeing and commit, because that helps us go forward and not get stuck. Um, I also feel that there is a what and a how of doing things, that what is, like, what are we committing to, but then how we are committing to it. And so in a big commitments like location strategy, which requires so much of resource and real estate and whatnot behind it, um, what are some of the experiences that you have had when it has not gone well? Right, like the organization realizes after 3 to 5 years that they have set up an office and it's not going well. Have you had experiences where you have helped the um, clients or the people that you're working with, or even internally, that how do we
Yeah.
solve or entangle that?
I kind of look at it from kind of two different directions, like when it worked well and when it didn't work
Mm,
well. It's like one of the things that I've seen is, there'll be like legacy large organizations that maybe are located in some small town in the Midwest, or somewhere that doesn't necessarily have a large talent pool to draw from. And and in their minds, they may be thinking, why did we make this decision 100 years ago to locate ourselves in this area? It made a lot of sense then, but doesn't make a lot of sense in 2025. And then hopefully being able to provide the guidance to help them make those decisions. Maybe they can keep their hub there, but maybe they open up other hubs in other areas or something along those lines. But the opposite I see is actually what is more likely to happen, which is when organizations are consulting the data in advance of making a big decision to move an office to someplace, they actually have a much larger hit rate in terms of their ability to do this successfully. And then if there is some kind of immaterialization of it doesn't work out, well, guess what? It's usually more due to people factors and culture factors and the inability to do like organizational change, or those are the things that may hinder you more in those situations, rather than do we have the talent availability? Did we locate in the right place? Should we have been in Lisbon or Poland? Like these are more data driven questions rather than human questions.
So we're kind of getting close to the end of the show. So I was just wondering, Cole, what tool is your go-to and trap as you think about workforce planning and analytics?
Well, my trap in workforce planning, I'll start there. And I say this probably every single time I talk about workforce planning, and it's so much easier said than done. But every workforce planning team I've ever spoken with or been a part of that went awry, it was because of this one factor, which is, did you successfully embed yourself into the way business is conducted? All right. And I always say, if workforce planning is a tack on to your business, it's always going to sit on the shelf and inevitably fail. But if you embed yourselves into the way the business conducts itself, whether it's annual planning or quarterly planning or business reviews or headcount or whatever parts of the business, like how they normally operate their AOR, right? Their annual operating plan. If you can embed yourself into that process, you are so much more likely to be successful. I'll say, in terms of the tool, this is going to be kind of out of left field, but one of the things I always thought of that this type of visualization never gets its due, and I don't know why, but it is one of the most virtual or versatile visualizations that you can use in a variety of spaces, whether it be workforce planning or talent intelligence or people analytics. And when people see it, they just understand it intuitively, which is box plots. I don't know why. No one likes box plots, but they're the best visualization out there for being able to compare different groups or different locations, or being able to visually show that there's a variability of distribution in data in a way that people can interpret. And especially box plots that are in some of the more fancy tools like the Tableaus or the Spotfires. If you can find a way of visualizing box plots, that is my favorite visualization of all time, and it never gets its due.
It's so interesting. I in data-driven org design, actually, I've got a chapter on box plots,
Yeah, love
believe it
it.
or not, and I've tried a lot, and we've built box plots into Orgvue and things like that, and it's like understand distribution. But
Hmm.
what I've struggled with is people. So many people just aren't interested in even the most basic. I mean, this is whatever 16-year-old statistics, right? This is not.
Yeah.
This is that understand the range of the data and the median, and it's and you get so much from it. So I'm 100% with you. Yet I've struggled to get people to engage with box plots, and I
Well, come
mean, have
join
you
me on
struggled
my
as well?
journey. of
Yeah.
climbing up this Sisyphus-like hill of
Yeah.
box plots. So I would love for you to join me, Rupert.
Yeah. I'm there.
Maybe we'll have another episode on box plots.
I've got a
Yeah.
I've got a whole section. I've written about it many times. I've pushed it, and people are like, just give me the bar chart. I'm like, yes, but you're missing so much. You're missing so much. You're
Love
missing so
that.
much. Yeah.
Love
So there we
that.
go. We did not prep that, folks. Cole and I did not prep the nerds of data, but it's a simple visualization.
It is.
Yeah. That's a good way to end. Well, thanks for that. I was not expecting that. That was not left field, by the way, but it was unexpected for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is fantastic. Well, on the note of box plots, it was absolutely fantastic to have you, Cole, join us today. And Rupert, as always, it's a pleasure. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for listening to us, watching us, and please like and subscribe. Take care.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.